New to CS5 is the option to add grain to your RAW file for a more natural film-like appearance. And for images captured at a high ISO that contain excessive noise, we'll take a look at some brand new tools available to minimize these artifacts. I've got my Camera Raw dialog open here, and I want you to select the image at the top titled Grain. Now, if you don't have your images open from the previous lesson, you can find Grain in the Chapter 8 folder. So simply open that up in Camera Raw. Now we're going to demonstrate the new grain feature here, and probably the easiest way to see that is to look in this sky area of the image. So I'm going to zoom in by pressing Control+ repeatedly on Windows. That would be Command+ if you're on a Mac. And let's scroll up here to the sky area. And this is really typical of what you see with digital camera files. In smooth areas of sky, it's just a silky smooth rendering. But if you want to mimic the effect of shooting on film, we can go over here to this Effects tab, and at the very top we have Grain. Now we've got three sliders, and notice that when amount is set to 0, size and roughness are grayed out. Amount is our volume control, so before we can do anything to these settings, we need to set an amount at a value other than 0. So you can see if I set a value of 25 here, size and roughness are activated. Now let's go through these in turn. With size, we can adjust the size of the grain. If I drag here to the left, I have a very, very fine grain. Looks almost like reticulated film. If I drag all the way over to the right, then the size of the grain increases. And of course, the further I go, the larger the grain gets. Now let's bring this back down here to a smaller size and get a much finer grained result. Now roughness is very interesting because roughness really refers to the texture of the grain here. And as I drag the slider to the right, I get a more random texture. So look at what happens here. You can see that there's a much more random approach here versus coming to the left. Bring this all the way down. We have a much finer, tighter, and more repetitive structure to the grain. So you can really play with these. Let's see, we'll set roughness right about here. The size will come down a bit on, and the amount is pretty heavy. But let me show you what it looks like if you go really, really too far. You can start to get some non-realistic effects there, but let's bring this down to a more believable range. Right about there actually looks really good. So what we've got is, instead of this silky smooth sky, we've got something that looks very, very similar to what would happen with a well-crafted scan of film. I'll turn the preview off and on. You can simply check this preview box or press the letter P. So there's our silky smooth digital camera file sky, and here is our simulation of film grain in the sky. Big difference, and you can get some very believable results with a minimum amount of effort. Now that's adding something to the image. Suppose we need to take some artifacts out of the image. If you've got a very noisy image, something that was shot either in low light at a high ISO or on a small camera sensor, when you zoom in to areas of the image, you will see lots of noise. And let's show you what that would look like. We're going to use this third image called NR for noise reduction. So I'm going to click here to highlight it, and we are going to go to the Detail tab, and just below Sharpening we have our noise reduction controls. Now before you use sharpening or noise reduction, it's very, very, very important that you be viewing the image at 100%. So again, with Control+ on Windows, Command+ on a Mac, I'm simply going to keep pressing that shortcut until I'm at a 100% view. And let's get a good look here at the face and in the hair. Now noise reduction has two basic controls. It can control luminance noise and color noise. Even though luminance is listed first, we're going to start with color noise because that's by far the most common defect that you're going to have to correct for. Right now we've got a value of 25, which is eliminating color noise, but let me show you what it looks like if this is off. Set that to 0, and look at this. You can see these red and green speckling all through the image here in the face. You can definitely see it down here into the hair. So when you have issues with this kind of noise where it's specks of identifiable color, you simply take your color slider and drag this to the right. Now, it's very rare that you'll need to go all the way to the right, so what you want to do is be very careful and conservative and just drag the slider until the bulk of the noise is eliminated. So if we go right about here, that looks pretty good. Now we've got this color detail slider, and what this does is really modify the color noise reduction. As we drag this slider to the right, we're preserving detail in the image, we're protecting detail from being softened up or obliterated at the expense of not removing as much color noise as we could. I'll show you what that looks like. If we take color detail and slide it all the way to the left, we're allowing that color noise reduction to work full strength. But as with all noise reduction tools, it's not magic. It works by softening up some of the image. So if we start to lose too much detail in here, we take the color detail slider and drag it to the right. And the further to the right we drag it, look how we're gaining back some detail here into the skin. Okay. Now this is not a night and day approach. It can be fairly subtle, so you want to be zoomed in at 100% and just pay close attention, because if you go overboard until it's a completely night and day difference, then I can guarantee that you will have obliterated some image detail. And we also want nice subtle results. We don't want our image to look overworked. You can see here, if I move this slider all the way over to 68, or let's go even further, that now you're seeing color noise in here because we're protecting detail so much that we're not effectively eliminating this color noise. So let's bring this back down to a more manageable level. Right about there. And this does a really good job of eliminating color noise. Those red and green specks are gone. Now let's talk about luminance noise. Unlike color noise, luminance noise doesn't show up as randomly colored pixels, but rather as splotchiness or just overall artifacts that make the image look grainy. It's in many ways a completely separate phenomenon from color noise, and that's why we have a completely separate set of tools to deal with it. It's a much stronger feature, meaning that you need to be much more conservative with it. Again, notice that below luminance we have detail and contrast, and those are grayed out when luminance is set to 0. So to activate any of these sliders, we must first turn luminance on. Luminance, just like with grain, is our volume control. So if we set luminance noise here, and this is a relatively aggressive move here at 20, look what's happening to the image. Look at how much it's actually being softened. Here's 20. I'll show you here's what 0 looks like. So you can see that we've really softened up that image a lot. So you have to be very careful with luminance noise, and you really want the use of this to be a last resort. If you can get rid of your noise issues with the color slider, by all means start there. But let's bring luminance noise up a bit. Now again, we're softening the image a lot, but we have a luminance detail slider. And with this slider, the further we drag it to the right, the more detail we're preserving. So if I drag this all the way to the right, it stops the skin from being softened up as much as it would be if I had this all the way down at 0. I think for here, luminance, let's bump this up a bit. And I'll show you how luminance detail works. I'm going to bring this up to right about 19 or 20. Let's see, 20 looks pretty good. So we've gotten rid of some of the artifacts in here. By moving the detail slider to the right, we haven't completely softened up the face beyond recognition. Now we have a third slider, luminance contrast, which is great because this preserves the contrast in those areas of detail. The further we drag it to the right, the more the contrast is being protected. So we don't have to settle for this almost soft focus approach here. If I drag the luminance contrast slider over, let's go pretty aggressive on this. We'll move this all the way over to almost 50. Let's say 49 right there. And that combination of a luminance value of 27 with luminance detail at 20, so it's protecting some detail from being softened, and with luminance contrast pushed fairly high, this is bringing back some of the contours and contrast in the face here for a much more believable result. And again, I'll toggle the preview off and on so you can see where the image started. Here's the image with our luminance noise reduction turned off. You can see that splotchiness and graininess in the face. And with our luminance noise reduction on, you can see we have a much smoother, more natural looking result. So again, in CS5, the additional controls to luminance and color make a huge difference and give us a much more believable and natural image even